Hello, everyone.
Welcome, beloved audience. Happy Tuesday.
Okay, nice day.
Those of you joining, a couple PSAs, we'll mention this a couple times, but would love to know who you are and where you're coming from. You can put it in the chat. But you first may need to change your recipients from panelists to all. We'd love for the whole room to hear what you got to say. We have an awesome product talk for you today, our 10th product talk. JH said he'd get a tattoo if we got this far, but still nothing.
We can workshop it.
I feel like this crew would probably be a good tattoo planning bunch. Hello, Michelle.
I was just in Brooklyn this weekend. Nice place.
Other attendees would love to know where you're calling in from today. I didn't include my location. I'm in Portland, Oregon. Greatest city in America.
Tucker is a big fan of Portland. We know this.
Emily Weaver, also Portland, Oregon.
Nice.
MVP in the chat. Michelle, come on down.
Nice. From Canada, very cool.
Come on down. This is now Price is Right. One of you contestants
I guess for most,
join our panel today.
For most of you, it's come on up, not come on down, but just felt right. Okay, we're gonna start off here with an early poll, probably the most contentious poll of the hour. This is, what is your favorite summer barbecue side? Really neck and neck. Right now, watermelon in the lead, 54%. Corn very close behind it, 43. Oh, wow. Very dynamic.
Yeah. It's like we need is it Steve Kornacki? Is that his name? We need give him like a live.
That is not in my skill set, JH. I don't know what I would answer to this question myself. It's like,
it depends on the day. Or if
it's
like a barbecue lunch, I think I go watermelon. If it's a evening lunch, I think I'm going corn. I might.
Right, or how hungry you are. If you're hungry, corn is the practical choice. But if you're just there for, if you just want some fruit.
Oh, Michelle's got a ride in potato salad. Wow.
Ooh, nice.
So I think my hot take is corn has a bigger spectrum. Like corn can be worse than watermelon, but it can also be better than watermelon. I feel like watermelon is like pretty dependably okay.
No, I think that's exactly right. Bad corn, wrong time of year. You're having starch. You don't want that.
Yeah, I think you toss it. A couple PSAs for the folks who are just joining, and would love to know who you are and your role and where you're calling in from. A reminder when using the chat to switch the default from sharing the message with panelists to sharing it with everybody. JH is demonstrating that for us in the chat at this very moment. We will have lots of time for questions throughout, and then of course a big chunk of time at the end. So please use the Q&A feature here in Zoom to note your question. And then there's that great upvote feature. We always want to make sure we are answering the most interesting question for the room.
Cool. Should we jump in?
I think we've got our answer. Watermelon, 60% of the time.
All right. Cool. Well, thanks for hanging out with us. I don't know how to get rid of this poll, but I'll go away at some point. I can do some quick intros here. So I'm JH. I head up the product organization here at User Interviews. We have Carol, who heads up our product management function, Katie, in charge of our product design function, and then Tucker heads up our food debates as well as our sales efforts. And we have a pretty exciting agenda today, a lot of exciting stuff. Both things that have already gone live, you might have noticed in the product, as well as some stuff that's right on the finish line and you'll see soon. And you can kind of see on the right here, this is how we're going to go through it. We have a bunch of exciting updates to scheduling. That's been a big area of focus for us for most of the year, and a lot of it's really coming to fruition now, which is really exciting. Then we're getting into some added flexibility. We're starting to bring into projects around incentives initially, but we're going to touch on a little bit of some of the broader stuff that will unlock for us and new workflows that we can power for you all. We've been making a ton of investments into our participant profiles, both in projects when you're managing a given research need, but also in your hub experience so that you can see all the data in a more intuitive way. And then a handful of highlights on the hub side that are all very exciting. And so we'll give each of those a little due to give you a sense of what's coming there. So pretty packed agenda, a lot of cool stuff to share. Katie and Carol will be driving us through it. If you do have questions, I'll keep an eye on the Q&A and we'll try to field those real time in context. So if you have a question about scheduling or a question about incentives, please drop it in as we go so that we can answer them while we're on the topic. It usually works a little better. And then, at the end, if we have any questions that we didn't get to, we'll make some time for those as well. So yeah, that's about it. And I might jump into hype things because I like all these features. So Carol, take it away.
First, we're going to start off with one question for you all to answer in the chat, which is, of the things that are outlined here, is there anything you're most excited to hear about today? And now we're going to remind you once again to set your chat responses to everyone. Definitely let us know. We'd love to make sure we take additional time, answer any questions on anything that is most exciting of the things on the sideline here. But with that, I will jump right into scheduling, hearing some love for scheduling, some loves for participant profiles, more on scheduling. Okay, a little bit of everything. So let's jump right in. So as JH mentioned, there are a lot of exciting things to share, some new updates and some upcoming updates to our platform. So many of these are requests to things we've been hearing about for quite some time. So we'll just jump right in. So we have we'll start with scheduling. We have a full team dedicated to scheduling right now because we believe it's so important to the research experience. And so I'm happy to share several updates on an upcoming revamped scheduling experience that we think will make it much easier for you to set up and run research with user interviews. All right, you can see from this blurry image, there's no way around it. Scheduling is really hard today, but we know it's critical for research. So if you're the only researcher on the project, you have to find the times that work for your schedule. Make sure you keep those up to date as any of your plans change. And then often we hear that you will need to adjust them as participants maybe are messaging you with different times that work for them. And if you're doing research for a team, it's just some sort of logic puzzle, as you can see from this image here, where you need to figure out all the times that work for the right people on your team across multiple calendars. But we know you have to do it. So finding a time is required for moderated research, and you want to make sure you get it right, because it's a real bummer if you have a great participant and you've already found them and recruited them and had them agree to research, but then for whatever reason, something goes wrong and you have some type of scheduling conflict. So for all those reasons, it's been a top customer request of yours for some time, and we're really excited to share some big updates that we're doing to scheduling. So the first step is automated scheduling. So with automated scheduling, which is an upcoming feature, all you have to do is sync your calendar and set your preferences, and then participants will be able to find time with you in any open slot. So just to give you a sense, some of the preferences that you'll be able to set here include the date range, so sort of start and end date of when you might be recruiting, how soon they can book. Can they book tomorrow, or do you have to wait a few days out? And then a buffer time. So you want to make sure that you're not having back-to-back sessions. So you could say, I need half an hour after every session to debrief and regroup, that type of thing. And then some smaller things like setting how soon slots can start. So they can start on the half-hour mark or the full-hour mark, for example. So what all this means is that you won't have to worry about finding times for each session and keeping your schedule up to date. You just have to set your preferences at the start and then let the participants do the rest to find the time that works for you. And for those of you who are running multiple projects and user interviews, you won't have to worry also about coordinating across projects. So you can just make sure that because your calendar update, your availability will be reflected in your sort of global schedule. So really also excited for some upcoming things that this could enable, like more continuous research or ad hoc research, where you can share a link to a participant and they can find a time with you because you know that your calendar will be up to date. So this should be out in the next 1 to 2 months. And so definitely keep an eye out for updates. You'll see a lot more here. And that's sort of the baseline that we're creating. So automated scheduling for, which will particularly help with one researcher and save some time. But we're really excited about the next phase of scheduling for research, which is really purpose-built for what we think we need in a research flow. So just at the start of our work on scheduling, we spent a lot of time talking to you all about what you need for scheduling specific to research, and especially what's beyond some of what you might see in the other scheduling tools. And one thing that we heard very clear is that you think of research as a team sport. So many of you are not doing sessions alone, but you might be doing sessions where with a team of others where different people play different roles. So you might have a moderator or an observer or note taker who all have different roles in the session. So we're exploring a series of changes that will support teams of all sizes. So if you might be a team of just 3 people and you want to make sure that everyone can attend every session. So as you can see here, we're exploring the idea of a collective session where all attendees are required. So that would be just looking for availability across all 3 of those calendars automatically. And then but we also hear cases where you might be a larger team and you have a few people who are facilitators and a few who are note takers, and you might do a round robin style scheduling where you know that you need 1 note taker and 1 facilitator for every project, but you don't need everyone to attend every session. So this would automate some of that logic puzzle that I talked about at the beginning of finding times that work. So as I mentioned, we're still exploring some of the design details here and would love to hear more about what resonates for you and what would work best for your team. So with that, I'm going to jump into our second most important goal of the day, which is a little bit more about how you do research. So I want you to think about your last moderated research project. I'll jump back here. So I want you to think about your last moderated research project. And there we go. I want to know who on your team attended the sessions and what roles did everyone play. So a few different cases here. I see y'all are answering, but solo research, this could be 1 person moderated and attended all the sessions. This could be on a team with roles. So maybe 1 person is always the moderator and others observe. It could be more of a rotating scenario where different people are moderating, or something else totally. So would love to know what's coming up most commonly. Okay, seems like we have a good number of responses here. So it seems like the most common one is you have 1 person who's moderating and others playing observer roles. So maybe the moderator is going to be always essential, the observer less so. And then a lot of cases where we have teams of people who are rotating through moderating. So definitely something we want to make sure we keep in mind, and definitely many fewer people who are doing just the solo research. So yes, I'm very excited to be able to support finding availability for some of these different situations where people play different roles. Just to take on a few questions in the chat while we're here, I saw, could you give an example of some of the rules that you can set for scheduling? Yeah, so this is what I was mentioning before, where you could set rules around, even though it's going to sync based on availability in your calendar, you might not want to keep every slot open. So some of the things you can set is how far out you want to schedule. Maybe I don't want it 2 weeks in the future. How close together the sessions can be, when they can book. So can they book tomorrow or a few days out? Those are some of the examples of the rules.
And there was one other question in the Q&A about from Nancy. Is it required to integrate our calendars, e.g. Outlook, Google Cal, to your platform to use the availability stuff, I assume?
Yes. So to use the automated scheduling that I'm talking about, it is based on the availability on your calendar. So you will have to sync your calendar with our platform. In addition, we will still have the ability to do the more manual scheduling as it exists today. So you can find slots that work for you and your team just by selecting them manually. All right, if there are no other questions on scheduling, we will jump into incentives. Oh, there was one more thing I forgot. While we were in scheduling, so what I mostly shared with you was upcoming changes, but I did want to highlight some changes that we recently made to scheduling, some smaller changes that make it easier to reschedule with participants who have already booked time. So when we were talking to many of you about scheduling, we heard about rescheduling as a common pain point, rescheduling as a common pain point, because if you've grabbed time with someone, you already have them on your calendar. It can be particularly difficult if for whatever reason it doesn't work out. Their schedule changes or your schedule changes. So some of the changes we've made here, you can now reschedule any participant. So it used to be that if the participant didn't, if you marked them as a do not show, you couldn't then go and reschedule them. Now you can do that. So if you happen to think that they didn't show up for the session, and then you later get a message from them that something came up, you can go and make sure you grab time with them. And the other thing is that if you set it as a setting, if you want to have it, participants can reschedule themselves. So they will see in all the messages they receive from us the opportunity to reschedule, which means that they don't have to go and message you to find time, but they can just go and find a time that works. So again, these features are already live, should be easier to make sure you can reschedule times with existing participants, and then excited to see the automated scheduling go live in the next few months here. Great. JH and Tucker, any other questions that have come up?
No, I think we're good.
Cool. All right, let's jump into flexible incentives. So the next thing I want to share is the ability to edit participant incentives after a project launch. So I'm going to share a few short-term updates, as JH mentioned, and then some longer-term updates on how we're thinking about supporting more flexible research projects. So just jump right in. The first thing we'll be able to do is you'll be able to edit incentives on a project after it launches. And there are a few reasons you might do this. One is sometimes we just hear from researchers who made the mistake. They set the wrong incentive amount, or they set an amount that didn't meet their company guidelines, so they want to go back and update it. And you can just make sure you can just go back and update it. But another case we want to support is maybe you actually started recruiting and you realize that you had the wrong incentive amount, and that incentive amount maybe wasn't enough to attract the candidates that you needed for the study. So you no longer have to contact our support team, and you can instead go ahead and make any adjustments that you need. And one thing I did want to call out, on the surface, a very basic update. Behind the scenes, one of the things that was important to us was that we compensated participants at the level of when they signed up. So the way that it's going to work is that when a participant signs up, they will get compensated. They will get an incentive at the amount when they sign up. And so if you adjust the incentive in the future, we'll only sort of apply that to new participants who are coming in. So again, the goal here is that you can, during any point in the project, you can update the incentive, but we'll make sure that we sort of are fair with participants and we maintain the contract of when they apply. So that's one thing that we're doing with incentives. We're making it so that you can edit it at the project level, hopefully give you a little more flexibility, and also just be a little more forgiving if you made a mistake on the incentive when you first launched the project. Now, the second update here is you will also be able to adjust the incentive for individual participants. So this is actually quite a common customer request today, and we hear about it for a few reasons. The most common reason is that you have a researcher who you maybe kept a participant over, was a very strong participant, or you wanted to keep talking, or something came up at the beginning, and you just wanted to make sure to compensate them for that additional time. But there are also other reasons for editing incentives. And for example, maybe you found a particularly strong participant and you want to give them a little extra bonus or a motivation to sign up again in the future. Or maybe you actually want to go ahead and grab a separate time with that same participant and compensate them for that. So whatever the case may be, you'll be able to adjust the incentive directly by looking at the confirmed sessions page, participant tracking page, and just as you can see here, go ahead and edit the incentive amount without having to go through support. So this is a small change, and we hope in the short term it's an efficiency gain, but also hope that it opens up possibilities for new ways to work with participants in the future that isn't as strict as we said we were going to talk for an hour, so we're going to talk for only an hour in this study. Now, looking forward, so maybe some context for how we got into the incentives and what's next. So one of the reasons we started focusing on incentives is that we have a team right now that's thinking more broadly about how we support more research projects, such as very simple continuous research projects, or like a multi-step, multi-method flow, which today our platform could support better. And so as the team started looking into this, they realized that incentives are a critical part of the story. They're the contract between participants and researchers, and that when they need to adjust it, and that they need to be able to adjust that contract in order to potentially recruit participants from different sources who maybe require different participants amounts, or pay different amounts if they're doing more than one activity. So this initial step to editing incentive is really the first foray into being able to support a more complex research project. So again, some of the things that we think of when we think of a more complex research project, which is somewhat illustrated here, is the idea of having multiple sources. So maybe you have, you want to recruit both from the user interviews panel and your own panel, or maybe a third party, like you want to recruit from a link that you share on LinkedIn or something like that. And also being able to do multiple, a sequence of different types of research activities in the same project. So maybe you want to do a survey with a broad set of participants, and then you want to take some of those top respondents and you want to take them into an interview. So we know all of these are research methods that your teams employ, and we want to make it better support in the platform. So while we're on the topic, I'd love to hear more from you about what types of research you do, especially some of the more sort of complicated flows. So we'll jump into our next poll question, which is, which of these research practices, you'll see them in a second, does your team typically use? So some of the types of things we hear is you want to source from multiple audiences in the same study. That could include, you know, your own panel plus Recruit, or it could include maybe multiple segments within our Recruit audience. You want to do multiple activities in the same study. That could be a survey and an interview or a series of interviews. You want to do continuous research, which would be regular touch points with customers on generally on a cadence, weekly or monthly. You do longer term or diary studies. So maybe you want to continue to follow up with the same participants over time, or none of the above. So definitely curious to hear which types of research you all are doing. A lot of all of the above. Thank you. I always love when I get survey design feedback from this group. This could use some structural support on this survey.
Cool. Carol, before we move on, maybe there were a couple questions on incentives. Yep. So we had one around, can you edit the incentive down if the participant ended up being lower quality? Imagine a session cut short, e.g. Ended early due to internet issues, or they misrepresented their experiences.
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the initial version of this, we're only going to be able to edit the incentive up. You will only be able to edit the incentive up, and we'd like to have you go through our team to edit the incentive down. And really the reason is we just want to make sure that we're being fair to participants and understanding the reasons why we're editing participants down. The reasons these shared definitely make sense. So for now, I would still contact support to edit incentive down. If someone did misrepresent themselves, we do have a special report button that you can use from that doesn't pay them an incentive at all. So I'd say for now, if it's a bonus, that'll be through the tool. If you're editing it down, that goes through support. And then if they didn't misrepresent themselves, you can report them directly.
Great. And there was one other. So on that follow-up to a previous session, what is the time limit and how long you have to enhance the incentive for a particular participant? So if you want to, increase it for a follow-up, how do you do that?
Yep. Yeah. So you have to enhance the incentive before you mark them complete, basically, because when we mark them complete, that's when we pay out the incentive to the participant. So you want to make sure that after your session, you go ahead and update that incentive. You could also do it before. And then when you mark them complete, that's going to be the last time that you can update the incentive.
Cool. And there was one more incentive question here. Will we be able to offer different incentive rates within a project upfront, or only edit ad hoc once someone schedules?
Yes. So in this version, yes, it'll only be ad hoc, though. So you'd have to go through the individual participants and update their amount. I am curious, Lauren, to hear more about setting those up front. I imagine it might be something like when you're recruiting from different audiences, maybe you realize that you want to recruit a professional segment at a higher amount and a B2C segment at a lower amount or something like that. But for now, you have to edit them individually. Definitely, we'll keep an eye on updates here in the future.
Yeah, and you touched on this a little, Carol, but I think one of the themes to the work we're doing here is making things more modular and flexible. And the idea is to have an eye towards these types of workflows in the future. So this source gets a $50 incentive and this source gets a $100 incentive and have that baked in. We're building all that stuff with it in mind. It just isn't, going to be there on day one, but that's, seems like we're on the same page, hopefully, from how I'm inferring that question.
Great. All right. Next, I'm going to, if there are no more questions on incentives, I'm going to pass it over to Katie to share an update on participant profiles.
All right, profiles. Jump right into it. So We know researchers have a lot to consider when it comes to recruiting and selecting the right participants for their research. We think that participant profiles are key to enabling researcher access to this user data and then driving efficiency during that selection process. So as you can see illustrated here, we believe that the participant profile data becomes more powerful over time. You can imagine where we start at the participant sign up. When a participant actually signs up, we get basic information from them, like demographics and personal information. And then we also get the data from opt-in forms collected when they're added to your Hub instance. And then every time they apply to a project, we learn more about this person. So they're responding to screeners that collect individual responses. And then they're also participating in all those different projects and sessions with your team. So we have the screener answers, and then we also have project history. And then after each session, a participant's profile continues to get richer with custom notes and session-specific feedback, such as how insightful the session might have been, and maybe context that could be useful for your project team on an upcoming project that you're wanting to run. Go to the next slide. So the first step to enabling this new profile experience is consolidating all of this important participant information we have today in one single place. This means displaying data that was previously not shown or data that was just in another screen in the product. So we recently launched a complete participant profile view in Hub that now provides a snapshot of a participant's activity stats, all of their user attributes, and a history of their participation. So you can now drill deeper into viewing the session and the screener details. So you can see that here on the right on this image. You can see a project history and then all the details around what this participant has actually done in user interviews. So now you can imagine when you're doing your vetting process and you want to be sure that someone has specific domain knowledge, you have everything you need in one place to give you that full picture to assess. So maybe this person has participated in a similar study before, or they've responded to a past screener question that has already screened for the topic that you're interested in for your research. You can imagine seeing that here to consider in your evaluation on the spot without having to leave the context of Hub. And then, as we mentioned around this concept of redesign, so we do have a fresh new design that's coming soon to both Hub and Recruit profiles. We observed that the need for participant profiles to adapt to context. So depending on where you are in your research process, you may want to know something different and need to access profiles during different flows in the product as you're going through your research. So we're building a profile experience that is both consistent across all of the user interviews product, but also adaptive to the actions that are most important to you in the context of your journey. So for example, when you're scrolling through a segment in Hub, you can access profiles without having to leave your segment view. Or if you can imagine using Recruit, you can access a similar profile experience to help with the selection of new participants. So we're hoping to continue building on this and setting up that context for you so you can access profiles universally. And then last is a little bit about what is coming soon. So we are currently exploring what it looks like to allow research teams to add custom notes into participant profiles. We're playing with how we might display these alongside session feedback in a useful way for researchers. So we've spoken to some folks that have expressed interest in this level of detail and collaboration with their team. And we think that this will continue to support researcher decision-making, again, during that selection process as you're recruiting participants for your study. And then we have another poll, but before we go into the poll, are there any Q&A questions for profiles?
There were a couple. I know we're getting a little tight on time with the Hub stuff, so let's do one here, and we can kind of keep it moving, and see what we have time for at the end. Will this additional participant profile info, for example, screener responses, also be shown as columns in Hub or addable to Hub? I can take past this one, Katie, if you'd prefer. One thing that we are trying to do and is really important to us is starting in Q3, rethinking our question capability a little bit as it relates to screener questions. And so both what type of questions you can ask and how we capture that data, but then also making it so that that data is available in Hub to be used as a filter or visible as columns and things like that. And so there's probably a little bit of work to do to make sure that we can land that capability in a really intuitive way and make it really seamless to use. But The team is very much actively looking into improving our question types and question capabilities, but then also kind of exploring the notion of like a question library and making use of all screener responses in the Hub experience. So probably a little bit of a horizon there in terms of when those things will come online and be available, but very aligned with the vision that we have and the work that the team is starting to dig into right now.
All right, we'll go ahead and jump into our poll then. So as we continue exploring everything around profiles, we are curious what other data would be most valuable to add to participant profiles. A couple options here that we presented: notes from the team, showing recruit project history and application rate, invitation eligibility, which is similar to like a cooldown period indicator on people's profiles, and maybe post-session feedback to show an average rating for a participant. And anything else in chat, of course, if you have other ideas. Yeah, application rate, responsiveness, all of the above, of course. Awesome. All right, I'll pass it back over to Carol.
Great. All right, we'll jump into some updates in Hub. And I love seeing these comments in the chat, by the way, on mapping screener data to Hub questions. Definitely top of mind, as JH mentioned. So more on that in the future. So I wanted to share a series of small updates, some large, some small updates that we've made to Hub. And I think these changes should make it easier to both build your panel and then engage them in studies. So ideally, the way we think about Hub is that building your panel should be a virtuous loop where you acquire new participants with all the data you need. That's either from your system through a CSV or through an API, or directly from the participants. So screener questions, as we're seeing in the chat, screener questions, opt-in forms, et cetera. You bring those participants into studies, and then you connect with participants and learn more about them, engage them with future research. So, and ideally, that learning from talking to participants and doing a session feeds back into your ability to then find the best participants in the future. So I'm going to share a few updates to all of these steps so that you can build a stronger panel over time. So the first thing is a major update to building your panel. So we've shared in the past that we have a Hub API that you can use to update the participant data in Hub. And we've also integrated with tools like Census and HighTouch. These are reverse ETL tools that your data team may already use that make it easier, even easier, to grab your data from your own systems and update Hub with them. So we're really excited to announce that we have a new integration with Zapier, which many of you are probably familiar with, no-code tool with connections to over 5,000 different tools like Hub, Airtable, Google Sheets, Salesforce, et cetera, which will allow you to move data from those tools into Hub with no code at all. So just a few examples on how you might use Zapier. You could do this. You could use Zapier to send more rich targeting data from your CRM into Hub so you can make better recruitment decisions. This could be around maybe your own segments and profiles you've already determined in your system, or activity in your application, et cetera. User interviews, we have a census integration. So we, in our Hub, have a view of how recently someone has engaged with our app and how, so that we use that to do our own research. You could also use your opt-in form. You could do an opt-in form through a third party and then send that data into Hub. Or you could do something like we've been experimenting with on the team, sort of a new use case, which is you could take a summary generated by a session recording tool, like we use Grain, and take that AI generated summary and drop that back into Hub. So you're building your participant profile over time. So lots of powerful use cases here, lots of opportunity that we hope you all will explore. And I share that with an exciting update, which is that Zapier is now available for all Hub customers. So this is in any tier, free forever, essential, premium, and enterprise. So I hope all of you get a chance to experiment with Zapier and think about ways that it can improve your flow. And so if you want to get started with Zapier, just go ahead and visit userinterviews.com/hubapi. If I can have Tucker or JH drop that in the chat, you'll have access to it. Just fill out a brief application, and then we will just get you access. So again, as I mentioned, I think Zapier opens up a lot of possibilities in sending rich data to Hub for a lot of reasons. And we will give you examples and information to get started. So again, encourage you to check out that link and apply. So that is a big update to updating Hub and building your panel of participants. Next, I want to talk about a smaller update to finding those participants once you have them. So we've made a series of changes recently to our Hub table, making it easier to find and organize participants in Hub. Most recently, we launched segments where you can create a reusable group of participants that you can then recruit into studies. This time we have just a small update, which is we have a Hub search. So you can find individual participants by name or other basic information like email or phone. So just meeting that use case of you know exactly who you want to find and you want to go in and find them should be easier. And we plan to build on this over time. So we have a number of more updates in Q3 plan to make it easier to find and filter and organize your participants in Hub. So keep an eye out for more information there. And then the last step, another new update, a totally new feature, is around being able to connect with participants and engage them in future research. So soon you'll be able to send emails to a subset of your Hub population. And the goal here is that we often hear that researchers are meeting with participants and engaging them directly through research, but there's no way today to be able to just sort of send the participant a warm reminder that you're glad to have them in the panel and you want to keep them engaged. So some ways that we could imagine, and what you'll be able to do is select a subset of your participants, could be a segment or could be people who gave feedback on a particular part of your product, lots of different ways to organize your panel. And you'll be able to send them a simple email, which you can see here. So a few different ways we might see teams using this. One, they might want to explain the panel to some newly joined participants. So you could say, welcome to our panel, here's what to expect. Or share an update on upcoming research, or you might want to share an update on a feature. So thank you for your feedback on this part of our product. We're happy to share an update and an opportunity to learn more. So all of these, we think that this is a way that you can make sure that you're really closing the loop with participants and both keeping them informed about upcoming studies, keeping them engaged, and really sort of building that engagement over time. So those are updates on building a panel, but we always want to know what's top of mind for you. So we'll do one last poll on how to build your Hub panel, just for good measure. So love to hear from you all. What are some of the biggest challenges you have with building and engaging your Hub panel today? Heard some things in chat, but would love to hear more if your challenges are, maybe building that initial participant list or getting the people to join. Maybe it's making a decision about who to invite for a specific study. Maybe it's getting participants to join studies, so actually sending the invite and making sure they're responsive and find time, et cetera. We sometimes hear from customers that once they join, it's hard to keep them engaged, so that could be a challenge. Would love to hear what you most commonly, some of your big challenges today. All right, good number of responses coming in here. So yeah, getting participants to join studies, definitely top of mind, and then building that initial participant list. So hopefully, hopefully we'll have a few ways that you can do that, especially the Zapier integration there. But yeah, that concludes. Thanks all for sharing that. Definitely all of these are top of mind, different challenges of the panel today. So that concludes our going through the new features that we're launching. Again, lots of exciting features. Would love to hear in the chat which of these, again, resonate most, or you're most excited to use, and then answer any questions.
Cool. Let's see what questions we got in here. Is there anything on the roadmap around enabling adding collaborators to projects before launching them? We don't have that currently teed up. I think what we're doing right now, as we talk about like revamping questions, making scheduling more of like an account level setting with a lot more functionality and power to it, is that we're basically taking the major parts of how you create projects and making them much improved and kind of more standalone. And as we're doing that, we're going to make sure that there's collaboration on those aspects. And so that'll be a way to add more collaboration into the project creation process in the short term. But we've heard this request for a long time, and so this is very top of mind. But we're looking at some of those more like foundational updates before we layer on additional collaboration there. So I suspect it will come someday because I know it's an important need, but not in the immediate term given the current roadmap. In terms of the participant profile stuff, would this help identify any inconsistencies in if a participant completed screeners for multiple studies? So I think, Katie, this is referring to the view you showed where you could see the, study history and drill down into it. I think the short answer here is yes. If you go through and expand those out and you see that there's a similar question that's been answered in inconsistent ways, you could certainly use that to, report the person or identify that this might be somebody you don't want to speak to. I believe that view right now is only for Hub. Is that correct, Katie? Or are we showing that view for Recruit as well?
Just Hub for right now.
Yeah, so I think this would be most useful for the Hub application of that. We, on our side, do a lot of monitoring for the Recruit audience always to make sure that people are being consistent in how they provide data and looking for suspicious signs of bad activity. And so that's handled in a little bit more of a scalable, automated way on the Recruit side, but we could look to surface some of that data on the Recruit side as well if it's useful. What else we got here? How will demographic and professional characteristics be collected for Hub participants? Do you want to take that one, Carol, since you were talking about building up a Hub panel?
Yes, let's see. I'm just trying to make sure I understand. Yes, or maybe this is referring to demographic and professional characteristics that Katie shared in the profiles. Yes, so typically, I guess there are a few ways we build data in Hub. One is through information that you might have in your system. So you might already know something about a participant and you could upload it via CSV or through an API, or you could ask the participant directly through an opt-in form or a screener. So this is the main ways of collecting data. And then also you could add notes on the participant after you complete a session, and you could build the profile that way. So those are the main ways that we add data through Hub. I think maybe this question was about, we said demographic and professional characteristics. That's also just how the standard data we collect on the Recruit side includes some of both of those. So that might be what you're referring to.
Yeah, there's a comment in the chat from John that I think is in a similar vein here. But I think one thing we want to do when we talk about improving questions and having more of like a question library and pull that into a central concept is it opens up the path to doing things like saying a response to this question is required to be in part of our Hub panel. So maybe they didn't come through a form that had that question. We can automatically append that question to some point of their journey to collect that information. And a capability we actually have on the Recruit side, we call it grace periods, which is very similar to what John is describing here, is that for every field, we say, how often do we want them to refresh or re-verify this information? So then also bringing that sort of concept into the question library and saying, if somebody hasn't provided us an updated answer on this in 90 days, 180 days, a year, ask them to re-verify it. And so there's a lot of cool things like that start to come out of those paths. So again, we're talking a couple months out on this type of horizon, but there's some really exciting ideas that the team has to kind of unify participant data collection and add some cool new capabilities to it. And you can imagine taking that as far as well as saying, this question contains PII, and so treat it sensitively for people in different roles and so forth. So again, I'm jumping ahead a couple quarters maybe, but there's some really exciting stuff that the team has been doing research and ideation around. So you'll see more convergence on some of these participant data capabilities across Hub and Recruit in the future. Cool. What other questions we have here? We are running out of time, but we got one from Artur Silva that's been here for a minute. Regarding participant volume, sometimes we have very specific requirements on screening, which rules out many participants and often leaves us limited. Is there any expectation of increasing your pool of participants per region? Yeah, so I think the question or the answer here is that we are always trying to improve our audience on the Recruit side. And so what we are basically doing is we have a bunch of operational metrics and reports that kind of give a signal of where we maybe are undersupplied relative to the recruiting demand we see from you all. And we use that to, in very specific and targeted ways, go out and proactively build up the network in regions or in job titles or people with certain devices. And so we're doing that across a lot of dimensions. And so we are basically, always trying to do that. And so I don't know in this specific case if, we're actively recruiting in that region that you're referencing right now, but the thing we pride ourselves on for Recruit more than anything is our ability to get qualified candidates in for any sort of niche recruit. We do that at a really high rate. I forget what our internal metric is on it, but it's, 90 something percent. We do it at a very good rate, and we often do that within a couple hours. And so to be able to do that, we basically have to monitor network health continuously and always try to improve it. And so that's we have a whole team that is basically that's their full-time focus, is to try to make sure that the panel is healthy and we're well supplied across all these different dimensions. Cool. I know we're at about time, so I want to be respectful of everyone who's hanging out with us. So maybe we'll wrap up there, and if there's any other questions we can answer over email or follow up, we can take it that way. Cool. Well, thank you, Katie and Carol, for taking us through all these exciting features. A lot of good stuff in here. Some scheduling stuff coming soon. Profiles are starting to already come out in the wild. Editing incentives you'll see shortly as well. And some of that hub stuff is already live. So we've had a lot of people had a lot of success with Zapier. So get in there if it's interesting to you, and we'll keep going from there.
Thanks, everybody.
That's it.